Well, welcome again to Politics in the Pulpit, a lectionary-based preaching podcast produced by the Joint Public Issues team. My name is Matt Forsyth, and I'm going to be your host again for today's episode. It's great to have you with us, whether you're tuned in to wherever you find your podcast from, or whether you're watching on our YouTube channel. But as always, I'm glad that I'm not alone, and I've got two fantastic guests from a Joint Public Issues team joining me today. We're going to be unpacking some of our lectionary readings and much, much more. He'll need no introduction to many people in the Joint Public Issues team and far and wide. That's the team leader, Simeon Mitchell. Simeon, welcome to you to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here again.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And a first time to our podcast, Aoife Wright. Welcome to the podcast to you as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Normally, you're on the other end of things to be able to all things recording and helping us put this podcast out. But we're delighted that we get to have you on the microphone today. So welcome to you.
Thank you. It's nice to be on this side of things.
Well, I hope that remains to be the case throughout the podcast as well. But welcome to those of you watching or listening for the very first time. As always, we want to encourage you with this podcast to subscribe wherever you subscribe to your podcasts, whether that be Apple Podcasts or anything else, or indeed subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest episodes of Politics in the Pulpit. This week, we continue to think about the different themes that we have going on in this month in October and our lecture readings, of course. In terms of themes, the biggest theme, I think, for this month, of course, is Black History Month. And so hopefully already in your preaching, in your worship resource creation, you've been thinking about how you can include Black History Month and be able to weave together various resources. And we'll speak about that a little bit later on. Not only that, but also it's United Nations Day on the 24th of October. So I wonder how that might be included in some prayers of intercession in particular as we reflect upon that too. So we have a couple of scripture readings that I'll get to in a moment. But as I said, it's not just my voice, thankfully, on this podcast. Simeon being the team leader, but if you're right, I want to come to you because your role is part of the internship scheme at the Joint Public Issues team. So tell us, when did you start? What's the internship scheme? And kind of what drew you to being a part of a joint public issues team? I wonder. So over to you. Let us know some of those reflections on the experience so far.
Sure. So I started in the beginning of September. So nearly 2 months now, which is wild. It's gone so fast, I think, but I've definitely enjoyed it. I'm the communications intern, so all things external comms. So things like the podcast, our daily stay and praise that we do, social media, things like that. I'm trying to organize that, which is very fun. And yeah, it's a year-long internship. It's a chance for me to get involved with the work that JPIT's doing, learn more about the intersectionality between politics and Christianity. I've known of JPIT as an organization for a while. I went to their last conference that they did, which I found really interesting. Yeah, so I'm excited to be on the inside now, learning more about how the team works.
That's fantastic. And what's been kind of the thing that you've learned so far? What's been something that now you're on the inside track, so to speak? Is there something which, having now be a part of JPIT, that you've kind of gleaned? You think, oh, I never realized that happened, or something that's amazed you? Is there something that, as a part of being a part of JPIT, that's kind of struck you in the first 2 months?
Um, I think it's been really interesting to see the amount of work that goes into an organization like JPIT. I think that it's been really interesting to be a part of that and to learn more about the decisions that are made during that process.
Mm.
I think I've learned better ways of listening and communicating across groups of people that maybe don't always agree. I think that that's been a really interesting thing to look at. And also, I think really like focusing on how Christianity looks at politics and how Jesus looks at politics and how we can bring both of those together in our lives has been really interesting for me to learn more about. And there are some amazing people on the JPIT team. I say some, they're all amazing. So it's been really good to learn from all of them too.
That's really good. We won't get you to name the ones that maybe you think not amazing. No, no, because you said they are all amazing. And talking of amazing people in the JPIT team, Simeon, you're here with us too. And I was struck when I had part of the induction for the vice president role in the Methodist Church and the president role designate is that we sat down with you, didn't we, Simeon, and Nathan, who's also been on the podcast more recently, and kind of had an introduction to some of the wider parts of the JPIT. And you're right, Aoife, there's so much that goes into decision making, in the communication of things. And I was really struck by that when I sat with you, Simeon, a couple of weeks ago. And for you, Simeon, what's you've been at JPIT for a little bit of time now. What's your experience of the internship? Kind of what do you feel it offers to the life of a joint public issues team? Because obviously it's a different way of doing employment in one respect. Because obviously you have people come in for a year and they leave again. So kind of what's been your kind of reflections on that experience of having interns at the joint public issues team?
It's absolutely brilliant because it means that every year we get some new people joining the team, 2 or 3 people who come in with fresh ideas, loads of questions, loads of suggestions about things that we might do things differently, fresh perspectives. We're a team of 10 or 11 of us overall, so having 2 or 3 interns as part of that, it's quite a high proportion of the group. We do a lot of work. A lot of our work is about discerning together about the right decisions to make, the things to recommend to our churches. So those voices are really key. They're normally young people's voices, so they're perhaps quite different from those of us who are rather older in the team, and that keeps us, I think, on our toes. And each one of them is unique and precious and brings something special and different. The difficult thing about the internship is that we go on a journey with people through the year and we see them grow and develop and grow in confidence and contribute more and more to projects. And then we have to say goodbye to them at the end of the year. And the only thing that makes that easier is the fact that then new people arrive who bring, all of their freshness and all that's good about that as well. So, no, it's a really special part of the team. We should say, because there are different models of internship. This is an internship which pays people a proper living wage. It's full time. It's open to everyone. So it's also not the kind of internship that you sometimes hear about that's just reliant on who your parents know and you being able to afford to offer your services for free. This is a fully, we fully invest in people.
Yeah, and you're certainly not just making tea or coffee for anyone. As Aoife, you kind of alluded to already, you're part of that communications that the Joint Public Issues team puts out. And of course, that has a huge responsibility in that communication and the voice that you're communicating. So they're given quite important roles in the life of the team, which I think reflects the quality that often people leave having done the internship after a year. And I just put that out there as a challenge. Maybe if you're listening and you're part of a church organization or charity or something alike, but maybe have you thought about an internship scheme of some sort? Simeon hinted at the fact that the conscious decision to pay a living wage and a salary to ensure people can come and invest in that year. And so maybe that's something, that strikes you as an idea that you might want to take forward. It's certainly been a real blessing for the Joint Public Issues team, and maybe it will be for your communities wherever you're listening from today. But enough about the internship just for now. I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about it as the year goes on, nevertheless. But we're going to dive into our scripture passages, of course, in our lectionary readings. And so we have a number of them to look at today. And we might want to take a couple and dig a bit deeper as well as we think about the issues of justice and how politics in the pulpit comes out from these passages. But of course, we have our Old Testament reading in Job, chapter 42, verses 1 to 6. We have our Hebrews reading, chapter 7, 23 to 28. And then our gospel reading is Mark chapter 10, 46 to 52. And our psalm is Psalm 34, 1 to 8. So that's our lot for today to think about. Is there one, Simeon, that stands out to you first and foremost when you got these lectionary readings? Is there one that, as you read them, you really went, aha, there's something here as a thread or a theme that I'd really want to start to preach on or unpack?
Well, I think unlike some weeks, there does seem to be a bit of a thread that runs through all of them and that connects the readings. Which for me, what immediately stood out was there's a sense that when people call out to God in difficulties, in struggles, that God hears and God responds. And we see that reflected on in different ways in each of those four passages. I think that's a message of hope today for those who are struggling for justice and struggling for peace. You know, we're really conscious of all the horrors of conflict that are particularly seem to be escalating in the Middle East at the moment, where people are struggling for peace and to hear that message of hope that God does hear and God does respond in different ways, I think is one that seems really apt as we try and link what we hear in scripture with what's going on in the world today. And I think there's also a message there about people being able to overcome barriers, both within them and beyond them, with God's help. And we see journeys of transformation in also some of these passages, which are, I think, really interesting to reflect on. And people might also want to use to think about their own journeys and their own transformation that has come as they have encountered and come to better understand God.
Mm. Eh, that's really helpful starting point. And I wonder, Simeon, for you then, is there um I put you on the spot here to reflect on this maybe, but you know, when your first point of saying you see throughout these scriptures of people calling out to God, um, and maybe at times haven't heard God's voice, but maybe you can see it in the journey, in the hindsight sometimes. Is that footprints in the sand poem, isn't it? That we can so often refer to when we look back, we see God actually was there carrying us through. But has there been moments, you know, and if you were to preach on this, is there any kind of particular moments you'd reflect on your own life that you'd want to be sharing or in your own experience, you know, professionally as well, and the experience that you would draw out from your own life story to kind of help bring this to life any bit more that you could share with us today?
Well, I think one of the things I've been reflecting on is that all of these passages are actually looking back.
Mm,
Well, most of them are about looking back, and particularly, you know, Job is at the end of his life, had had a real testing experience, and now he comes to the point of kind of, oh, I see now. I see something of what's been going on. I start to get it. And I think for me, a lot of my, I think my development in my faith and my confidence in my faith has only been visible in retrospect. You know, at the
mm,
time it's felt hard, but when I look back, that's when I see the growth going on.
mm.
And I think that's been a recurring story for me through my life and my faith journey. I think as a teenager, I thought I knew everything, and then and
Did you
then
not know
now, you know,
everything?
and I still don't know everything, but
Oh,
I know now how little I knew at that point. But yeah, I think it's taking some courage from that looking back and for seeing how far the journey has taken you. Yeah.
that's really helpful. If I bring you into this, is there anything what Simeon just said there kind of resonates when you were reading the scripture passages for this week? You know, did that resonate with you, or is there kind of a different take that you would take onto them? What's your kind of reflections on what Simeon's just said there?
I think I definitely agree, and as someone who is still, I imagine, closer to the teenage Simeon than the current Simeon, I think that I'm definitely starting to realize that there is um a lot more that I could know. I think um, kind of reaching that point of understanding and learning to listen, I think is really important. Yeah, so I'd really second what Simeon said.
I think there's you struck it about that, didn't you, when you introduced about the JPIT, you know, internship already, you know, but the first 2 months in, you've been struck about actually the power of listening, and sometimes so much we have to learn, isn't there, on that listening journey. Those that are around us, they might be right, they also might be wrong, but also it's in the listening that we can discern some of that and understand some of that. But I think too. There is some real merit, I think, and I wonder if people are going to be preaching on these passages for this week, whether you want to go on your own kind of self-discovery part of that soul expedition journey that you're on, and maybe take that time out when you're doing this preparation to do a little bit of that looking back moment, just as Simeon just reflected on there, looking back and going, yeah, maybe even just do it in a timeline kind of fashion or whatever, however kind of suits you in a creative sense. But looking back and jotting down those moments of reflection, going, actually, Where are the moments where I learn? Where are the moments that I grieve? Where are the moments that I experience deep joy? And just kind of picking out those moments in life where actually everything is formed into this moment, into this time, for such a time as this. And I wonder if there's a bit of our own self-discovery in our preaching that comes from understanding who we are a bit more in God and that identity. And so I think there is an invitation in the calling out as you draw that theme, Simeon, of that calling out to God and that response, that message of hope too. But overcoming barriers as well was a theme that you picked up, Simeon. So talk to me a bit more about that. Obviously we know that the prophet Job overcame significant trauma barriers in his life. And as you said, we're coming to the end of his life there, and he's beginning to understand this kind of relationship with God in a very complicated way, maybe. Um, talking a bit more about that, unpack that a bit more from these scriptures, that journey of transformation, overcoming the barriers.
And I think that that's something we see in the Job passage, but I think particularly in the bit of the gospel that we are presented with today, with the story of Bartimaeus, the
Mm,
blind man who's begging on the streets. And you see not only the barriers that we put up inside ourselves, but the barriers that are put around those who are on the margins often. So that if we dig a bit into the Mark passage. Um, a blind man begging on the roadside, but who shows through the way that he talks to Jesus that he recognizes Jesus even more clearly than the people who've been traveling with Jesus for such a long time. He's the first person in the gospel to publicly use this title, Son of David, about Jesus. That's the title that was associated with the expected Messiah. And we see the Bartimaeus doing that in the context of a whole chapter in which we just had James and John, the disciples, arguing about which of them is the greatest, and basically showing they just didn't get it at all
mhm,
about Jesus's message of accepting powerlessness, accepting humiliation, and accepting suffering. They hadn't got that at all. But here is this person who others would have dismissed, would have walked by, and would have shunned and tried to keep away from people who were important, who has this insight
mhm,
and has to come through all these different obstacles to get Jesus's attention. There's the crowd that's preventing him. There's the struggle to be heard over the other noise. There's the people who tell him to pipe down. And I guess this might be the experience I was thinking of those of us who have been justice seekers and activists for years and years on different issues, and are used to that experience, perhaps, of being told, shut up, you keep going on about this, go away, go away.
mm,
But he does get Jesus's attention, and I guess as well as that kind of sort of metaphor, it's a reminder of the very real physical barriers that those with disabilities still face today in getting access to, equal access to services and to the attention of those with power as well. So, I think that there's a rich seam of things that could be explored in that passage in particular.
yeah, I think you're completely right in terms of the context, and we can't forget, this in the narrative that's happening in Mark's gospel. Of course, Jesus on the way to the cross. Days are few. There's not much time. You know, we know with the benefit of the full gospel story of the timeline, but there's not much time to go at that moment in time for Jesus. And again, as you said, off the back of what seemingly is kind of a ridiculous conversation of James and John, that entitlement. And I think that's important to not forget about that ridiculous conversation has just taken place when we see this encounter. And I think there's something, isn't there, too, about he's absolutely the position of Bartimaeus on the margins, but also of the fact that we know who Bartimaeus is, or we kind of know who Bartimaeus is because Bartimaeus is named. And I think there's some significance in that, and scholars would kind of want to argue that too, some would as well, because There's many people who have been healed and transformed because of their faith that we don't know the names of, and we don't know their identity at all. Look back in Mark's Gospel, the paralyzed man in Mark chapter 2, we don't know the name. The withered hand, man with the withered hand in Mark chapter 3, we don't know the identity. And the deaf mute in Mark chapter 7, these are identities we don't know. But Bartimaeus, we are told of. So I think there's some significance uh, to reflect on in our communication of who Bartimaeus is. And of course, the name Bartimaeus, and we're told son of Timaeus, again, scholars are kind of divided on kind of who this identity really is. And I think that in itself, it could mean the honored one. Yeah, that's what some scholars would understand Bartimaeus to be, the honored one, or some would say the son of the unclean one. Two very juxtaposing understandings of the same name. And I wonder, uh, were those names interchangeable? I wonder, is it because of the transformation that we see the meaning go from one to the other because of the faith that's shown? We don't truly know, but there are musings that I think we could reflect on, and the importance of Bartimaeus calling out from a place of having been able to see but no longer can, and being able to call out from the margins and to be in a place of vulnerability and begging to see then faith come to the forefront to offer transformation because of what Jesus does, I think's not to be overlooked. So there's lots of richness, I think, in some of this scripture of, as we said, overcoming barriers, calling out from the darkness, and a message of hope too, as well.
If we're
Aoife,
thinking about naming, Matthew, just a slight tangent, but I don't know if you noticed the other people who are unusually named here is
mm,
if you're using the longer version of the Job readings, which kind of goes on to verses 10 to 17.
mm,
The other people who are named here, who you might not expect to be, are Job's daughters. Did you
mm.
see that? So
Yeah, yeah.
it says he has three daughters and seven sons. It doesn't tell us who the sons are, but it tells us the names of the daughters, and that's really unusual actually in scripture for women to be have that kind of honored recognition
Mm.
of being named when the men are not. So I don't know where that might lead you, but it's just note if you're going to explore that angle of the importance of being named and what names might mean, that might be something you want to pick up on as well.
Yeah, and I think there is something in so often again because we're given the information, we can pass it on by almost because it's just we know it's Bartimaeus, but actually it's as we dig a bit deeper, what does that really mean for the reader that would have read it not just in this time but in times gone by as well? What was the writer trying to communicate? As I said, that scholars are kind of divided on maybe the opinion of what Bartimaeus' name truly means, but I think even in the uh, disagreement, I think there's some nuance and some I think some discussion to be had for us to learn from as well. Aoife, is there stuff that's kind of shone out for you from that conversation about Bartimaeus, about the encounter that Jesus has, as we say, on the road to the cross? We know that whole encounter of healing. Is there anything that kind of brings a message of hope for you? Kind of what comes and stands out for you?
Yeah, I think that was a really important point you mentioned, Matt, about the fact that, reading this gospel, we know from having read it before, from learning about the Bible before, we know that um Jesus' time on earth is coming to an end. He's preparing for that. He knows what's going to happen. But I think it's really interesting how he knows that he has this little amount of time left, and so he's trying to share his word and to encourage people to continue to share his word, and yet he still will stop and help individual people. He will still do what feels like a small insignificant act to everyone else but can mean so much to one person. And I think that that's something that we can really take on in modern days, is even the acts that we feel are small and insignificant and don't mean that much can actually have a massive impact. And we don't always need to be doing the biggest thing or getting involved with the loudest people. We can just do small things and that will still have such an impact. And I think that Jesus recognized that, and I think that, yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah.
One of the kind of the details in this, which I think is really it's significant and just follows on from that, Aoife, is in this encounter that goes on. Yes, there's significance in who Bartimaeus is and what he represents as well. But then in the moment of their dialogue, Jesus and Bartimaeus, it starts by Jesus saying, "What do you want me to do for you?"
Mm.
And what a question to go in with. He doesn't make assumptions about what Bartimaeus is wanting. He's not seeing the person with a disability and thinking, well, that must be the issue that he wants me to address. And I think that's a really profound example for us to follow as we work alongside and seek to stand alongside those who are on the margins in our society, those who have different needs as well. I don't know if either of you are Strictly fans. I'm not really into Strictly, but there are members of my household who are very into Strictly Come Dancing. And this year, one of the contestants on Strictly is Chris McCausland, who's a comedian who is blind.
Mhm.
His first ever person who's blind to have been on Strictly, and I'm told he's doing really well, which you might not expect given all the challenges that must be presented in trying to coordinate a dance routine when you can't see what your partner is doing. Um, I don't know about Chris, but it's very clear that blindness doesn't stop people from leading very full and fulfilling lives. Disabilities don't stop people from leading very full and fulfilling lives. And it might not be the thing that they would want to change if they had an encounter with someone who had the power to bring about that change. And I love that Jesus didn't make the assumption, but simply asked and honored Bartimaeus by saying, "What do you want me to do for you?" Um, it really chimes with the practices for justice, which we've been developing in the Methodist Church as part of the justice seeking church work, which one of the practices is to do things with, not for people.
Mm.
Uh, and if I bring an example from the work of the Joint Public Issues team in the last couple of weeks, one of the things that we've been involved in supporting was last week an event in Parliament with Let's End Poverty around the Dear Prime Minister set of letters. So 15 people have written letters to the Prime Minister saying, talking about changes that they would want to see in their communities and in society around poverty. And these were published last week and launched as an event in the House of Commons, hosted by Cat Smith MP, a good Methodist MP. And 13 of the people who wrote the letters were there. They shared their experience and their expertise with MPs and with members of the House of Lords, and they started a conversation about how people with lived experience of poverty can partner with policymakers to design solutions to poverty. We believe really strongly that solutions to poverty need to be found by listening to and by working alongside those who've got expertise through their lived experience.
Mm.
And this seems to really kind of connect with this line in the gospel. Let's listen to what people have to say and what people have to bring rather than assuming what a solution might look like for someone. Um, just as an aside, we were really excited that having had that event on Tuesday evening last week, the Prime Minister was asked about this set of letters, Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, and he responded that the letters were honest and powerful and important, and they hold up a mirror to our country. So it seems that these experiences are being honoured and listened to, and it seems to me that also has some echoes of what's going on in the gospel there of wanting to hear people's experiences before jumping in with solutions to problems that are imagined.
Uh,
So
And to
yeah,
pick,
I really like that.
I think, and to pick up on that one step further, Sim, because I think that's so powerful, is when we think about where we sit right now in this month, in Black History Month. I think there's some, I would hope, some transferable learning challenge to take that forward in terms of, I think of myself first and foremost as a white man. Actually, there is a question that a challenge I think that sits, for me to go um to people to ask the question, during Black History Month, what can I do at this time? And to ask the question, to be someone of an ally, to be someone who's faced racial discrimination, for example, and to ask people who are friends, people who have experienced racism at the forefront in their lives, to ask that question to them, people that I know, uh, what can I do? And to not kind of assume the answer is one thing or the other, to assume the answer is to repost a status or to repost a picture or to do this or to do that. Though those things might be very well intentioned, etc. But actually to go to the source of someone who's experienced racism and ask the question, what do you think I can do? And simply to listen to the answer, to not already have a preset conviction as to what it is that I need to do. And I wonder if there's a challenge for those of you listening too, that maybe you recognize you might be in a privileged position, or in a place of position of power potentially as well. But where are you finding those marginalized voices in your communities, in your friendship circles, in your church places and spaces too? And asking that question, what can I do? Not for, but with that in mind. And I think there's a really that's a vulnerable question to ask, isn't it? But I think that's a question which, when it's done in the right way, in the right context, I think can be really life transforming, not just for the one that's asking it, but I hope for the one that gets to answer it too. Because as you say, Simeon, as we've seen through the House of Parliament, those experiences, lived experiences, when their voices are at the forefront, and are the thing that are driving the change, that's when transformation happens. That's when there's a real shift in culture, and that's what we want to see across the board. And that's part of my hope, I guess, in Black History Month, is that we begin to continue to see that shift of change and that shift of positive transformation. Um, is there anything else, lastly, uh, standing out for you in these passages, as we kind of begin to close our podcast today?
I mean, I'd love to just speak on what you just said. I
Mm,
think that alongside that, there's also room for just holding space
yeah.
for those people. I think the doing things with people, not for them, is incredibly important. Um, I mean, I'm a disabled person, and sometimes it's nice to have people say, what can I do for you? Can I get you anything? Are there things that I can do for you? And sometimes it's nice for people to just hold a space for me to vent about, how I'm feeling, how I'm doing that day, that kind of thing, just checking in. I think that both of those are incredibly important. And so sometimes it's also not what you can do for them, but just being there for them, regardless of who that person is or what they're going through. I think that's massively important.
And how would you encourage people to hold that space? What does that look like? Just kind of give a bit more context about it, because I think that's really profound and powerful, and people will be listening thinking, I absolutely want to do that. How can they do that better in their context? And it doesn't have to be a how-to guide necessarily, but has there been experience where it's been done well for you, or maybe learning from experience where it's not been done well, and maybe stay away from doing it like this? Is there any kind of more examples you could give, Aoife? Because I think that's really valuable as an insight to offer.
Yeah, I think it's not pushing someone. I think it's, you're holding the space not necessarily for them to use, but for it to be there if they need it. You're not there to ask questions and educate yourself in that space. It's their space to be able to use and feel comfortable in.
Yeah.
And I think that, obviously it depends on your relationship to the person you're talking to, but I think it's really important to engage with what they're saying and respond appropriately, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. I think, if they're feeling like they're willing to share more, then hold that space for them to do it, but obviously don't push people. And yeah, I think it's a lot easier when you're in that individual conversation and you can see more where things are going. But yeah, it's important to let them lead it, I think, and just be there to deal with whatever emotions come out. Maybe some will, maybe some won't, and either way, that's fine. But being a supporting hand, a supportive friend, I think is the best way to do it.
It's in the context of that relationship, which I think is important and not to be forgotten, how powerful. There's something about what we've seen in these scriptures, again, is about there's a journey in, there's a Jesus making a journey, of course, to begin to make that journey, and we too are invited to make that journey, aren't we? And that's probably the challenge when it comes to the pulpit, is because sometimes the pulpit can be a very unrelational place potentially because it's that kind of communication style, and that I think that's a challenge for us to, uh, yes, communicate in the pulpit, but it's also we spend most of our time, I hope, outside of the pulpit, and actually it's how we live that life of relationship, and asking the question, but more importantly, as you've challenged us to, Aoife, about saying just holding the space and curating the space that allows people to be and to be where they are. That's a really helpful challenge. It's a last comments. Say last orders of business, as they'd say, last orders for our scripture passages for the lectionary this week that you want to share in. Simeon, of course, you kind of mentioned some of the work of JPIT more recently, and we kind of applaud that and celebrate that those voices are being heard in the political sphere. But is there anything else that, from your perspective on the passages or wider as team leader, that you want to kind of chime in on before we kind of wrap up today?
Well, I just want to pick up that point about relationship and just go back to where we started, which was the Job passage, and
Mm,
noting that Job at the at the end of his all his sufferings and his trials, what does he get? Well, he gets his restoration of his material wealth, and he gets to be back with his friends and his family. But above all, what was most important was that he got to a point of relationship with God, where he could ask his questions and have them answered. And I love that is the kind of level, that's the height of maturity. That's the kind of the ultimate point of his journey, is to be at that point where we can have that open, honest relationship with God and that dialogue with God, and that's when the insight starts to come. And I think that's what we would want for our relationships with those around us as well in society, but also, of course, with God. And then just we haven't mentioned the Psalm, which is the set for the day, and I guess that also connects with that because that talks of a relationship with God, of thankfulness and of encouragement, and of God acknowledging that God has answered, will answer, and has answered prayers and crying out when I was, my poor soul was crying and it was heard by the Lord and saved from every trouble. So I think that really brings together, I suppose, the messages of the other passages as well, and it's something that I hope we can proclaim wherever we are on our journey, that there is both hope and thankfulness about God's faithfulness in all of this.
definitely. And there's a lovely line in that psalm that says, "Those who look to him are radiant." And I wonder, when people leave your gatherings, your place of worship and community, however you choose to do so, are they leaving with radiant faces? That's the challenge that we leave you with, maybe. Are you helping people be more radiant, not covered, but radiant? What does that look like in your context, I wonder? And wouldn't that be a prayer that we see that more and more, not just for those that we know, but also as we've picked up that thread of those on the margins, that we see they would be radiant and they don't feel shame, because that's another word, isn't it? We're often hearing, unfortunately, that people can often feel a place of shame, but actually wouldn't we want to? And our hope is that people feel radiant, that they're glowing, and be able to be in that place in their life as well and experience that joy. I think that's a hope, isn't it? And a hope to come. Thank you both of you for all that you've offered into this Politics in the Pulpit episode podcast. As a reminder, this is a lecture-based preaching podcast produced by the Joint Public Issues team. We want to encourage you to subscribe to this podcast. It does us a world of good. Leave us a review, tell us hello, and let us know in the comment section on YouTube if you're watching on there what you've enjoyed, what you've been challenged by, maybe your own kind of reflections on the scriptures as well. We'd love to see that too. But thank you for listening. As always, thank you to Simeon. We appreciate you being here, and to Aoife, it's been great to have you on what I hope won't be your last Politics in the Pulpit, but I'm sure you'll be happy to go back to doing the editing of this as well. But bless you both. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. I look forward to being a part of more conversations here at Politics in the Pulpit. God bless, and we'll see you all very soon. Bye for now.